Welcome to Where Parents Talk. My name is Lianne Castelino. Our guest today is a father of two and a psychologist who's been in practice for more than 25 years. Dr. Chris Thurber is also an educator, an award-winning writer, and an author whose work focuses primarily on positive youth development. Dr. Thurber joins us today from Exeter, New Hampshire. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for that kind introduction.
So today we're going to talk to you about transitions and changes. And obviously over a year or so, that's been sort of the overarching theme of just about everyone everywhere. And so I wonder, what are some general principles as a psychologist that you can share with parents about how they can optimally look to support transitions in their children?
Well, I think we can talk about all different kinds of transitions to school, transitions to overnight camp, transitions in relationships, transitions out of relationships. And the best way, I think, to look at those transitions and the way in which parents can guide young people in looking at them is through, first of all, an optimistic lens, that a transition is an opportunity to grow, to change, to be challenged. And every transition has some parts about it that you can control and some parts about it that you can't. And as the old adage goes, being able to distinguish between what you can and can't control and focusing primarily on what you can is a recipe for success. Focusing primarily or even obsessing about what you can't change is a recipe for frustration.
Absolutely. And, I think about sort of the heightened sense of anxiety that a lot of parents in particular have experienced over the last, course of this pandemic, and it's not over yet. And, it is just such a loss of control in that way. So what kind of strategies could they employ to maybe lessen their own anxiety and thereby lessen that of their child?
I think focusing on what the child's strengths are. So obviously, children and adults all have different temperaments, which psychologists more or less define as what our response to novelty is like, and whether we have a temperament that's more slow to warm up, and with big changes, we experience a lot of emotional and physiological arousal, or are we more easygoing and transitions are things that we have historically taken in stride. There's not a lot that you can do to change somebody's temperament, but there's a lot that you can do to change their attitude. And I think for parents, being able to focus on what that child's strengths are from a character standpoint, not a skills standpoint. So I'm not talking about whether they're good at baseball or playing the piano, but instead, are they good at being generous? Are they good at persevering? Are they good at being brave? And when you can, and every parent can, if they think about it, identify their child's temperament and look, at the child's history and think from a character standpoint, what have been their strengths? And really base your preparation, your response, your coaching of the child through that transition on their strengths. And I think that instills a sense of confidence in the young person that although there's going to be some new things that nobody can expect, and as we've all experienced in the last 18 months, lots of unexpected things, lots of changes, big changes in the same week, in the same day sometimes. It forces us to be flexible, but flexibility and creativity are also great character strengths. And like it or not, we've all gotten better at those things. But I think, a little reflection on the parents' part about what's my child like, what makes them tick, when do they excel, and what are their character strengths, and then how can I leverage those to make this upcoming transition especially beneficial, and understand that every transition will come with some trepidation, some feelings of anxiety. That's all normal. And I think the important thing for parents to do in that instance, in any instance, is to normalize those feelings of nervousness prior to a transition. And try the best you can as a caregiver not to contradict the feelings that your kids are having. So many times kids will say, oh, I'm, really nervous about starting middle school, or, I don't know about this whole college application process. I don't know if I'll get into a good school. It's very tempting as a parent who loves and appreciates their child to say, oh, come on, like, don't think that way. You'll get in somewhere. Or, well, it's middle school. Like, it's not a big deal. And there's part of what you're saying that's factually correct, but it's not emotionally aligned with what the child is feeling. So it's going to feel to your child like a contradiction or like a dismissal of their emotional state. So if they say, I'm really nervous about starting eighth grade, rather than minimizing it or dismissing it or saying, oh, eighth grade's a grade like any other, just do what you normally do, you'll do fine. Recognize that that's how your child is feeling and say, yeah, you know, uh, I can imagine that there's a lot that's on your mind starting this school year, not just that you're going from hybrid or online learning to, back to in person, but it's a new school building. There'll be some new kids, lots of new teachers, a new schedule, and that's a lot to get used to. I hear you. And
So
notice in what I said, there's no problem solving there. There's also no contradiction, no minimizing. You're just seeking to connect. And as you and I have talked about, Lianne, one of the wonderful things about empathy is kind of a foolproof technique. When you make your best attempt at describing what you think someone else is feeling or what someone else is thinking, which is really the definition of empathy, if you miss the mark, if you characterize the other person's feelings in a way that's not accurate, if I say, "Oh wow, Lianne, that sounds like a really tough day. You must be so angry at that person." If you're not feeling angry, you'll correct me. You'll say, "No, Chris, it's not really anger as much as I feel disappointed because now I have to reschedule that thing." And so, oh, okay, so you feel really disappointed. Either way, we're making a connection. So I either miss the mark and you correct me, and then I can validate what you are describing your thoughts or feelings as, or I'll be close to accurate, in which case, we're making a connection. Either way, we're making a connection. And that's why I often say to caregivers, make that attempt at empathizing and know that even if you miss the mark, you kind of get points for trying.
it's such an interesting point because listening to you explain it sounds so simple, and it really is just seems like a little tweak and change in approach. So, what would you say to parents who probably, may have never sort of taken that approach before about how to do that on a
Yeah.
regular basis?
Well, so first I say, because people are often wondering, okay, what's the difference between sympathy and empathy? And the way I see it, sympathy is an expression of condolence or sadness. You express sympathy when you hear that somebody's dog died or somebody's grandparent died, or you can even be sympathetic when your child underperforms in a test that they really thought they would do well on. So you're feeling sorry for them because of a circumstance. But empathy is when you accurately characterize what someone is thinking or feeling, and it can be very positive. If you win megabucks or the lottery and you say, Chris, guess what? Like $10 million. And I say, Lianne, you must be so excited. You must be overjoyed thinking about what you could do with that money. And so we can empathize with positive things, but empathy is about connection, where sympathy is about condolence. And so once you've made that distinction, then I think the place for everyone to start is, back when you were in elementary school and learned the parts of speech, you need an adjective that describes a thought like confusion or wondering, or a feeling like overjoyed or anxious or frustrated or angry. And that's the thing I would say to really simplify it to start. There are many ways to provide empathy, but start by taking baby steps and making sure that the statement that crosses your lips contains an adjective that describes your best guess at what the other person is thinking or feeling. And it really just needs to be a sentence. Sometimes it can be just a word. If you say, I went to 9 different stores and tried to find organic bananas, and none of them had organic bananas. And I just respond by saying, wow. Just my tone and that single word, you're feeling like, okay, I get that, you must feel like this afternoon was a colossal waste of time. I might say, well, you're really frustrated, but what I don't want to do is immediately jump in with problem solving. If you come to me exasperated, I went to 9 different stores looking for this and none of them had it. And I say, oh, well, you know who carries organic bananas? You should have just first gone to the convenience store right around the corner. They don't have a lot, but they have organic bananas. You might be happy that I've given you a solution, but you definitely know you need to keep searching. And you're not feeling particularly understood at that moment. What you want, what anyone wants when they come to someone with an expression of strong emotion, positive or negative, is to feel connected to the other person, to feel understood. And as I often say, the power of empathy is in the pause. So if you have a solution, bite your tongue and instead come up with an adjective that you think describes the person's thoughts or feelings. If I say to you, oh my gosh, you must be just exasperated, frustrated that the 9 places you went didn't have what you were looking for. And you've got to be thinking, does anyone carry organic bananas anymore? If that's pretty close to how you're feeling, then you're like, yes, oh my gosh. But I need to not immediately follow my statement with, some commentary or some problem solving. If I say, well, you must really be exasperated, but you know what? Why are you after organic bananas? What's wrong with regular bananas? You should or why bananas at all? There's so many other different kinds of fruit. I may be well-intentioned in offering you a different way of looking at the world or questioning why you want organic produce, but it's not helping you feel any better. And even if I've prefaced my commentary with an empathic statement, like neither one of us right now can remember what I said because it makes that empathy evaporate. So I want parents to practice using an adjective and restricting what you say to a single sentence that doesn't have an epilogue with any commentary or any problem solving, and give your empathic statement an opportunity to really sink in, because that's the connection, right? And here's a really cool thing about it. It does take practice, as you said. It is a little tweak, as you said, but it's enormously powerful in diminishing the intensity of people's emotions, which if it's happiness, you don't necessarily want to do. In fact, usually when somebody comes to you with something happy, it's natural to empathize and join them. Sometimes you can really rev each other up in your excitement, and that's really good. And people don't need to practice that. But when it's a strong negative emotion, we do need to practice and we do need to let it sink in, because if I'm frustrated or angry, I really can't think clearly about a solution or a different way of looking at things. First, I need to have my emotions come down out of the rafters. And empathy is sort of like an interpersonal natural tranquilizer. It helps people to calm down when they no longer feel alone in the world.
So let me ask you, given that explanation, the idea of changes and transitions,
Mm-hmm.
when we're talking about adolescence, so, 15 to young adulthood, 24 years old, that age group, you've got change that's naturally occurring because of the developmental years involved there. And then you've got all this other stuff that's going on. We talked about at home, at work, at school, in terms of transitions that could happen. So what do you suggest in that case that parents be mindful of in terms of transitions that maybe they wouldn't normally consider a transition themselves, that their kids might be going through?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think as adults sometimes we forget naturally what it was like to be in that 15 to 24-year-old cohort, and maybe some of your viewers and listeners are 15 to 24 years old, so I hope that they appreciate and agree with what I'm about to say. And one thing is, caregivers need to remember that when they were that age, the world was necessarily different. And so if your child is interested, and when I say child, again, I'm talking about that 15 to 24-year-old cohort, rather than assuming that you know what their experience is, make an inquiry about the transition itself before you say, well, gosh, I don't remember that, going from junior year to senior year in high school was such a big deal, or I I thought you liked this house and you were excited about the move. Gosh, being in a military family, we moved around so much. I don't know why it's such a big deal. Again, it can come across as minimizing, or as you pointed out, just not even conceptualizing it as a big transition. But your child is having an experience that is their own. The world is different. And if you can remember those two things, then I think it comes naturally to say, to ask an open-ended question, such as, what about the move has been most exciting for you? What about the move has been most upsetting? Or, you sound disappointed. I'm wondering what about the move was unexpected, and again, I would follow my own advice and say, you sound disappointed, period, full stop, wait. Am I right? Am I wrong? Is that the word? Are we, and then, so what is it that's, most upsetting, or what is it that has disappointed you the most? Anyway, I think we're always in a better position to empathize when we don't graft our own history or lack thereof onto somebody else's life, but just remember what they're experiencing, what they're going through is quite different.
Absolutely. Turning to the fall of 2021, it certainly promises to be a period of transition unlike any that we've seen in recent memory within a lot of families for a lot of different reasons. We're talking about, potentially returning to in-school instruction, going back into a school building, reintegrating into society, as it were, with respect to, socialization and being in front of people and all the things that we've heard being reported. I wonder what concerns you the most, and what are you most hopeful about as you look forward to the upcoming fall?
Well, I'll start with what I'm really looking forward to. And if things unfold as you and I are predicting, much more in-person instruction, much more social contact that is face-to-face, and if everyone's vaccinated, unmasked. So being able to see people's facial expressions and being able to see people in real time, face to face, in the same physical space, I think will be a welcome change for everyone, and just feel really good. And speaking of, connections, I think when those connections are even stronger than they could be over text or telephone or Zoom, then I think, those connections are even stronger. So I'm really looking forward to that. And with great respect for all of the teachers, including me, who tried their best to provide awesome, engaging instruction virtually, I think almost every teacher I've spoken with at hundreds of different schools have said, yeah, I used to be worried maybe that virtual learning would, maybe replace me somehow. Maybe I'd be out of a job because of this or that content which is available online. It's a very interesting thing, right? Because historically, who were professors? Professors were the people who actually had the knowledge. They had the content. And I'm talking about thousands of years ago. And then once the printing press was invented, professors, again, they were the people with the knowledge and the books, because not everyone could afford them. And then, printing got less expensive and a lot of content was disseminated in print, but still teachers, professors were content experts. That hasn't been the case for 20 years. I mean, not that professors don't have expertise, of course they do, but when it comes to what they're teaching, unless it's a, graduate doctoral seminar, there is that pretty much that same content somewhere available online, probably multiple places online, but there's something so wonderful about the in-person delivery and the exchange of dialogue and the projects and the conversations that are really richest when they are happening in the same physical space. So that's a little bit of a, of a sidebar, but I think it's one of the things I'm most looking forward to. Teachers today are outstanding at the delivery and the pedagogical part of teaching. They're no longer the sort of kings and queens of content, but we taught ourselves in the last 18 months, just having access to the content isn't the best kind of learning. So I'm looking forward to that. The things that I'm worried about, I'm worried, you and I have talked about the book that Hank Weisinger and I wrote that was published just a few days ago, The Unlikely Art of Parental Pressure. And in the book, we really argue that we've been asking for hundreds of years the wrong question, which is how much pressure is just enough? How much is too much? And in the book, Dr. Weisinger and I reframe that as, how do you deliver pressure, or how do you apply pressure? What are the ways in which you pressure your child? Parents, caregivers love their children. It's impossible not to apply some kind of pressure. But there's harmful pressure that frames the outcomes as very narrow and the stakes as very high, kind of do or die sorts of situations. And then there's a pressure that is really focused on effort and having that child be their best self, not the best. And I worry that as we transition back to in-person school following a year of virtual or hybrid learning, where admittedly a lot of students fell a bit behind, not terribly so, I mean, some perhaps, but students are aware that they have some catching up to do. And I worry that this will be one of those situations where parents will apply unhealthy pressure by saying, this is your one chance to get caught up this fall term, because if you stay behind, there's virtually no chance that you're going to get into the college of your choice, or you didn't get to practice soccer most days except by yourself or in really small groups, and if you don't come out strong this fall for tryouts, there's no way you're going to make varsity. Again, a narrow goal with a do or die kind of frame around it actually is experienced by kids as quite anxiety provoking, and ironically a decrement in their performance. They're going to not do as well, and that's the opposite of what parents are trying to do when they say you got to really do this. So I'm worried a little bit about that, and obviously I hope that people will look at the book and learn from it, and we fill it with a lot of examples because it does take practice, but it's definitely doable to level up your parenting game. I also worry that during the pandemic, with less social contact and fewer ways to entertain themselves, a lot of adolescents, and I don't have hard data to support this, just my clinical experience and anecdotal data talking to other school psychologists, it seems that marijuana use, alcohol use went up, again, because kids were bored or because there weren't other options that seemed as attractive to them. And some unhealthy risk taking, of course, is characteristic of adolescence, but transitioning now back to what I think will be more rigorous academic, athletic, and artistic demands on kids, that's pretty incompatible with regular substance use. And I worry that for some kids, it's going to be hard to kick some of those habits or adopt healthier coping strategies. I certainly hope that parents can have candid conversations with their adolescents and young adult children about what are their preferred ways of coping, and rather than condemning whatever experimentation or use has been going on. I mean, parents don't have to be happy about it, but the best way to have a conversation with anybody about altering their substance use pattern is to ask them, somewhat surprisingly, what do you like about it? What are the good things? What are the not so good things? And is there anything about your use that you think you would like to change? Which, again, it's counterintuitive because parents are usually pretty heavy-handed when they discover that their child is using. And I guess now I'm talking about maybe the younger end of that, adolescent cohort that we were referencing earlier. And again, you can have a strong emotional reaction. I don't want to take that away from any parent. And if they're seeking to help their adolescent change, transitioning to a non-judgmental stance that focuses on what are the healthy coping strategies you can develop, I think is the best way forward, rather than just finger wagging.
I love the idea of the question that you just asked, which was taking that question about, let's say that your child has a substance abuse issue, and taking that question and flipping it on its head, because I'm sure 99% of parents would do exactly what you described, which was, well, why are you doing that? We all want to know why, as if, there's going to be an answer to that why that's going to satisfy us.
Right.
But taking that around and saying, well, what do you like about it? I mean, I'm just listening to what you're saying. It's really quite striking to think about asking a child that. On that note, at what point would you suggest, against this backdrop of change and transition that this child is potentially going through, when it becomes problematic, when should a parent intervene or escalate the intervention, and how do you suggest that look?
And are you talking about substance use in particular?
Yeah.
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 Well, a couple of things to look for. One is your child's overall performance in whatever their responsibilities are. And right now it could be during the summer months, both in Canada and the US, maybe they have a job, or if they're not old enough to have a job, maybe they are playing a sport, maybe they're just hanging out with their friends. But what kind of a friend are they? What kind of an athlete or artist are they? Maybe they're taking some summer school classes. How are they performing? If they're at a job, how are they doing? So whatever it is that they're doing, asking, am I observing any decrease in their functioning in terms of what I would expect it could be, knowing them as well as I know them? So that would be one. How are they functioning? And I'd expand that a little bit and ask, how are they eating? How are they sleeping? And then I would look at the sort of social and emotional domains. And you don't need to be a clinical psychologist. You just need to spend some time with your child to get a sense of how they are functioning emotionally. Are they mostly happy? Do they seem extra irritable? Do they seem really sad or down? Are they withdrawn? Are they sleeping far more than 9 or 10 hours a night? And getting a sense of their mood, I would say those two things are the best ways, functioning and an observation of their emotional well-being, it will give you. And I would say to parents, trust your gut on this one. If you really feel like, no, if you're wondering, or if you're feeling, no, this is definitely not my child at their best, then I would consult with a licensed mental health professional. There's a third way too, which is the easiest of all and will be intuitive, but I'll say it anyway. And that is when your child comes to you and says, I need help with this, or maybe they're not mentioning substances, but I'm really, really depressed, or, Dad, I'm having panic attacks, whatever it might be. So, those three things, sort of subjective distress, level of functioning, and then mood, in however you characterize that, those are the best indicators, I think, of when it's appropriate to consult with a mental health professional.
So what you're talking about here is what could happen if the change or transition that a young person is experiencing goes, very much down a certain path and
Right.
down a line. I'm curious, what are you seeing generally in your practice over this pandemic period in particular, as it relates to change and transition, that has struck you?
Mm. Well, so as you and I have talked about, I work at an independent school here in Exeter, New Hampshire, about 1,050 students at Phillips Exeter Academy. We have 800 or so boarders, about 250 day students. And although I haven't been meeting with students over the summer, what I observed in the spring that, you know, first of all, impressed me was how resilient young people were and how positive their attitudes were. There were a lot of times when I think their attitudes about all of the transitions that we were having to endure were a lot better than a lot of the faculty and staff. And I would include myself in that, sometimes a lot better than my attitude. So it's impressive how resilient young people are. And adolescence is a period of time that is often mischaracterized as crazy wild emotions and um, unreasonableness and lots of unhealthy risk taking. And that's another topic that we could talk about in a future episode. But I do believe that's a mischaracterization in a lot of ways. Humans wouldn't be where we are without the evolution that has taken place over, I don't know, roughly 40, 50,000 years. And adolescents are uniquely primed to learn, to be creative. If you wanted someone to take risks, this is the time to do it before they're responsible for their own children or to a partner or spouse. They think outside the box. And that was another thing that really impressed me, in my practice, was not only how resilient kids were, but the ways in which, in the cohort I work with, is sort of 13 to 19-year-olds, the ways in which they were making lemonade out of lemons. And it's one of the reasons I love my job. It's genuinely inspiring. And I was really, really impressed with the solutions that kids came up with to make the most out of the transitions that, quite frankly, they were being forced to make. Um, you also asked, what concerned me, and I think it was just that it was very lonely. We were all distant from one another interpersonally, and that starts to have an effect in a few days, let alone a year or more. And it was lonely for a lot of kids, and I worried, not just at Phillips Exeter, but all over the world, that there were kids who needed more companionship, more supervision, more, recreational, unstructured playtime, and weren't getting it because it was one virtual class after another and homework. And, kids were even taking their meals, at boarding schools in their rooms without anyone else there. And I think that sort of chronic solitary existence, unless you're, I don't know, a desert ascetic or a monastic or something, isn't particularly welcome or healthy.
On that note, I wanted to ask you, not only are you a psychologist and an author, but you're a father yourself. So painting the picture that you just described of the workplace and what you saw there, I'm wondering what you saw at home as it related to transition and change
Hmm.
with your own two teenage boys, and what struck you about that.
Well, looking back on it, love the fact that my wife and I got to spend lots and lots of time with our boys. And I think if they were sitting right here, they would say that, yeah, most of it was really, really fun. I think, like most families, we also got on each other's nerves and needed some space. We we were really fortunate to have purchased a dog 2 weeks before the lockdown, unbeknownst to us. But this gave us an opportunity to get out of the house, and be together, but with a little bit more space around us. And that was a relief. I think what I observed from my boys, the older one had finished secondary school, had graduated from Exeter, and chose to take a gap year before starting university. And what I saw in him was a tremendous amount of relief that his schedule went from, and forget about, virtual instruction and all the rest, but at most high schools, including the most rigorous ones, kids feel a lot of pressure. They're leading a highly structured existence. They have to stay on schedule, and a lot of times really invigorating, but they can all use a break. And, summer's the perfect time to do that. My older son Dacha got a chance to do that, and then the ensuing 9 months, and he was really creative in what he did. He was outside for most of the fall, working at the summer camp that he's working at now, but wasn't in operation in the summer of 2020, doing, facilities management and helping with site planning and doing a lot of physical outdoor labor, literally, which was so different from hitting the books and playing violin, which he also does. And then in the winter and the spring, it was just great that he had so much time to devote to violin, and loved being able to do that instead of shoehorning practice into just the available hours that were there once he had finished his homework. He had the whole day. And I think that did something creatively for him that would not have occurred if he'd chosen to go right to school. And for my younger son, it was a very different experience. More of frustration and loneliness. And of course, not complete solitary existence, because he got to spend time with his older brother, who he loves, and with mom and dad, but he really missed his friends. It was hard to see them only on Zoom, and he was acutely aware of the change in the quality of instruction. He knew how hard the teachers were trying, but he felt like there was much more that he needed to teach himself, and there wasn't an opportunity for study groups and discussions, and in the same way that there is when, school is normal. So I think emotionally it was tougher for him. And I'm really hopeful that this year, starting this fall, will be much more the high school experience that he had enjoyed his first couple of years. So fingers crossed, and with lots of encouragement to any of your viewers or listeners to get fully vaccinated if they aren't yet. So, it's healthy and helpful for them, and also for other people. And, that will, that will give us the most freedom, I think, the most opportunity, if we don't have to, in the back of our minds, be worried about our physical health.
Without question. Dr. Thurber, I'm just interested at some final thoughts, your top 3 tips that you can share with parents on how they can optimally manage transition and change in their children's lives.
Well, in addition to the things I've said so far, I would say, first, it's wonderful to be able to share some of your own experiences with transitions. And that doesn't mean your children need to adopt your style or follow suit, but it does help to normalize the swirl of emotions that accompany transitions, whatever they are. And I think when our kids feel not just connected to us, but they feel like we truly understand something about what they're going through, they're much more willing to have conversations with us about, okay, so, Dad, you kind of get this. I mean, the world was black and white when you were a kid, but let's talk a little bit about this transition. So I would encourage parents to share. The second thing is I would really encourage parents to pay attention to how they are framing the transition. And just like the pandemic and the quarantine restrictions that accompanied it, there you go, had for all individuals some benefits and some stressors, different proportions for different people, but was not completely good or completely bad, just like most experiences in life. I would encourage parents to look at all dimensions of the upcoming transition, right? And um, encourage their kids to think about, well, what does this present in terms of an opportunity, right? And then the third thing is encourage your kids to see transitions as things that they help create, not things that are happening to them. So this is true for all of us, but I don't think young people realize it as much. And that is, this transition, whatever it is, it could be a loss, it could be a gain, it could be a lateral move. We could be talking about a new school. We could be talking about headed to summer camp, start of a relationship, end of a relationship. As I said, what are the ways that you can be instrumental in creating elements of that transition? So this is building on the idea of what can you control, but it's not just a little bit of influence here or there. I think young people can really sort of grab the proverbial bull by the horns and say, okay, here are the parts of the transition that I can control. Now, how do I really leverage that to make it what I want it to be? So sure, dad, mom, you're saying, this is normal and transitions have some positive parts and this is an opportunity, but I got to think about what I need to do to create this transition and a process that actually I feel like I'm driving part of, so that at the other end of the transition, I can look back and say, I helped make that. I helped this happen in the way that it happened. It wasn't just where I chose to dip my toe, but I really looked at this as an opportunity to influence what I was creating and what I'm transitioning out of and into. And that's wonderful. I mean, that's an incredible life skill.
It truly is. Dr. Chris Thurber, thank you so much for providing such incredible food for thought, strategies and tips for parents to consider today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me as a guest.